Your mother has Alzheimer's, Mr. Musk." The words sat heavy in the room, dense and immovable. Elon's breath caught in his throat. He glanced at the doctor, then at Maye, his mother, who was seated quietly beside him, folding and unfolding the edge of her sweater like it were a napkin at a forgotten dinner table. The doctor paused kindly. "It's not just forgetfulness. This is a progressive condition. It's already affecting her ability to hold on to short-term memories and even important relationships." Elon said nothing. He simply stared ahead. His mother didn't react. She smiled faintly at a painting on the wall. It was as if she hadn't heard. Or perhaps she had, but didn't recognize the gravity of it. The doctor leaned forward. "You've probably noticed changes, repeating stories, misplacing names, losing track of time." Elon nodded slowly, still unable to find his voice. Yes, he had noticed. It began almost like a game. Little things. The wrong word for refrigerator. Forgetting what day it was, or calling his assistant by the wrong name. She'd laugh, brush it off. "Oh, I must be getting old, darling." It was charming at first. Familiar. Human. Then she started missing birthdays. Not just others, her own. She called him one night and asked if his father was coming for dinner. His father had passed away over a decade ago. Still, Elon tried to rationalize it. She had always been sharp, but eccentric. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe it was stress. But the day she didn't recognize one of her grandchildren, that's when he knew. The spark in her eyes dimmed, and the pause before she spoke stretched just a little too long. There was no laughter in her voice, only confusion, quiet panic, even if she masked it with grace. Now here they were. Elon cleared his throat, finally managing. "Is she going to forget who I am?" The doctor's answer came gently, but without avoidance. "In part, she already has." Time fractured. Elon's lips parted slightly, his chest rose, but no breath came. His world did not fall apart, it slowed, like something sacred breaking in silence. He turned to look at his mother. She was still smiling, politely, her gaze now on the doctor's tie. She was always so well-mannered, always so proper, but not here, not now. She didn't know why she was here. She didn't know what they were talking about, and she didn't know he was her son. Suddenly, the years rolled back in Elon's mind. He was no longer a man, he was a boy again. 6 years old, running across a garden path barefoot, arms wide open, cheeks flushed with joy. "Mama!" he had cried, leaping into her arms. She had caught him, laughing, spinning, wrapping him in the warmth of everything safe. Her perfume, her heartbeat, her words. "You'll always be my brave boy," she had whispered then, "even when you're a man." The memory flashed through him like lightning through stained glass. In voiceover, a younger version of him seemed to speak from inside his chest. "She was my whole world." Elon blinked hard. He was back in the room. The white walls, the doctor, the silence that no one knew how to fill. His body recoiled slightly, not out of fear but pain, the kind that humbles, the kind that leaves you breathless and still. He looked at his mother again. She turned to him, smiling, softly, almost affectionately, but with the eyes of someone greeting a stranger at the grocery store. No recognition, no flicker of remembrance, just the practiced kindness of a woman who had always been good to people. Elon smiled back. It trembled at the corners. His eyes welled with tears, but he held them in place with sheer will. For her, always for her. She tilted her head. "Are you the gentleman who brought me flowers last week?" "No," he said quietly. "That wasn't me." "Oh." She nodded thoughtfully, still smiling. "But I like you. You have a nice face." His heart shattered like porcelain in a quiet room. He reached for her hand. It was cold, fragile, but familiar. Their fingers laced together like muscle memory, like love lingering beneath the rubble of time. A long silence followed. Neither of them broke it. The doctor waited patiently, as if understanding this was no time for facts or checklists. Then Elon spoke, not loud but clear. "Then I'll help her remember." His voice didn't beg or break. It promised. It anchored something sacred inside the chaos. She didn't understand what he meant, but she nodded anyway. He leaned forward, kissed the back of her hand, and smiled, not with certainty, but with devotion. The scene faded as a soft piano melody began to play, like something remembered in the dark. Dear friend, if this story is touching you, if it reminds you of someone you love, or of a quiet memory tucked deep in your heart, I'd be honored if you joined us for the rest of this journey. You don't have to press, like just to help a video. Press it because somewhere, somehow, someone else might need this story too. And if you choose to subscribe, I promise we'll keep walking gently through stories that matter. After all, memory is a bridge. And maybe, just maybe, we can cross it together. The air inside the old house in Pretoria carried a stillness that didn't exist anywhere else. It was the kind of quiet that wrapped itself around you like an old quilt, musty, worn, but comforting. Elon stepped through the front door with a reverence usually reserved for sacred places. This was the house where his laughter once echoed down the halls, where bedtime stories were whispered under patchwork blankets, and where Maye's voice had shaped the very rhythm of his childhood. He hadn't been back in years. Life had taken him far and wide, boardrooms, rocket launches, sleepless nights. But now his mother's fading mind had drawn him back like a thread pulling through time. The wood floors creaked as he walked, every step waking ghosts of who they once were. In the attic, dust motes danced in slanted sunlight. The scent of old paper and cedar chest lids filled the room. He climbed the narrow staircase slowly, each footfall heavy not from effort but emotion. At the top, stacked unevenly against the slanted wall, sat a tower of boxes, some labeled in his mother's handwriting, others simply marked with numbers or years. He pulled one forward. The cardboard was soft with age. Inside, time had folded itself neatly into forgotten corners. There were photographs, edges curled and color faded. Elon picked up one of him and his mother at the beach. He was 5. Maye wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, but the shape of her smile was unmistakable. She was laughing, caught mid-motion, holding his hand as a wave crashed behind them. Another photo, Christmas morning, a pine tree leaning slightly under the weight of too many handmade ornaments. He stood barefoot in pajama pants, grinning beside a toy rocket with foil wings. She had written Elon's first launch on the back in green ink. Beneath the photos lay a folded piece of lined paper. Elon unfolded it carefully. It was a note, written in her unmistakable handwriting, though the ink had bled with time. If you're ever lost, remember, you were born to find your way. Love always, Mom. His throat tightened. Further down the box, he found a small porcelain doll with a cracked arm. His sister's, he remembered. But it was Maye who had mended it, sewing a tiny blue ribbon around the break to keep it steady. She had always fixed what others discarded. Always. Then, buried beneath a stack of old magazines, he found it, a cassette tape in a clear plastic case with a label that read Lullabies for Elon. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was hers. Carefully, he placed the tape in a player he had brought from a house's study and pressed play. The room filled with a low hiss, then her voice. Soft, steady, familiar. Hush now, my darling. The moon's in the sky. He closed his eyes. The years fell away. He was no longer a man standing in a dusty attic. He was a child again, curled in bed with stars stuck to his ceiling, and a mother sitting at his side, stroking his hair, singing as if her voice was the entire world. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sadness alone, but from the sheer power of memory, how something so simple could awaken so much. He held the player to his chest and whispered to no one, "I'll bring these back to her." One by one. With care, he selected the items, the photos, the doll, the note, and the tape. He placed them gently in an old leather suitcase that had once belonged to his grandfather. The kind of suitcase that traveled slowly by train or by hope. It smelled of worn leather and history. By the time he reached the clinic, the late afternoon light had turned golden. He walked in without announcement. The front desk nurse recognized him and smiled softly. "Bringing treasures, Mr. Musk?" she asked, nodding toward the suitcase. He returned the smile, quieter now. "Memories." She said nothing else, just gently waved him down the hallway. Maye was sitting in a chair by the window, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her gaze far away, watching clouds or perhaps the shape of her own thoughts. When he entered, she turned to him with polite curiosity. "Hello," she said, as if he were a visitor, which to her he was. Elon approached slowly, placing the suitcase on the small table by her side. "I brought some things," he said, voice calm, gentle. She nodded but said nothing. He opened the suitcase and took out the tape. "This is your voice," he said, placing the cassette into a small bedside player. "You sang this to me." She tilted her head slightly. "I used to sing." He nodded, pressing play. The melody returned. "The stars are all listening, so close your sweet eyes." Maye listened, expression unreadable. But then something happened. A single tear welled at the corner of her eye and slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't seem to notice it at all. Like a signal from somewhere deep inside her, a sound remembered not with the mind, but with the soul. Elon knelt beside her, his voice barely a whisper. "It's okay, Mom. We'll walk through time together." She reached for his hand. He let her take it. The song continued, wrapping around them like a memory that refused to fade. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The past had returned, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to remind them that love, when anchored deep, outlives even the mind. As the song drew to a close, Elon remained at her side, not as a stranger, not yet as her son, but as someone she knew to trust. And for now, that was enough. Elon walked into the room with a quiet sense of ceremony. In his hand, carefully pressed between two pieces of thick cardstock, was a wrinkled sheet of paper, not valuable to the world perhaps, but sacred to him. Maye sat by the window, as she often did, her eyes tracing the movement of a tree's branches outside, her expression calm, yet distant. The late afternoon light touched her silver hair, setting it aglow like silk in candlelight. "I brought something," Elon said softly, drawing a chair close to hers. She turned to him, offering that familiar, polite smile she gave to guests. "Something for me?" He nodded and carefully unfolded the page, revealing a child's drawing done in bright crayons, wavy blue sky, uneven green hills, and a jagged red triangle with a long, squiggly tail fluttering across the sky. A red kite. His name, Elon, was written in large block letters at the bottom, surrounded by a sun with sunglasses and birds shaped like the number 3. He placed the paper gently in her lap. "You made me that kite when I cried for 3 days straight," he said, his voice laced with a quiet smile. Maye picked up the drawing delicately, her fingers grazing the crayon lines. Her brow furrowed slightly. "Did I?" "You did. I was 8. Something happened at school. I don't even remember what now, but I was inconsolable. You came home with red fabric and wooden sticks, and you said we were going to build something that could fly sadness away." She looked at the paper again, but her face gave no sign of recognition. Elon continued anyway, his tone shifting from matter-of-fact to something more lyrical. "You found an old sewing needle in the kitchen drawer. I held the string while you stitched the fabric. We tied it to 2 thin wooden rods and reinforced it with tape because the wind in Pretoria can be stubborn." He smiled at the memory. Still no response. She was listening, though. He could tell. Her fingers stilled. Her posture softened. "Then we took the bus out to the hill," he said, watching her for the smallest flicker of recognition. "The one past the olive trees. It was the windiest day I could remember. I thought it would blow me away, but you held my shoulders." He paused. The memory was so vivid in his mind that he could almost hear it, the wind whipping around them, the sound of his own laugh finally returning after days of silence. "You said, 'Let the wind carry your sadness away.'" At that, Maye blinked. Slowly, she turned to him, her pale blue eyes searching his face. "Did I really say that?" Elon nodded, his voice trembling just enough to betray the emotion he tried to control. Yes, and it worked. A moment passed. Then, as if reaching through fog, Maye placed her hand over his. Hesitant, gentle, but intentional. Elon didn't move. He didn't even breathe. He just let the warmth of her touch fill the space between memory and present. There was something in her eyes, a faint glimmer. Not clarity, perhaps, but presence. A quiet leaning toward something lost. You ran with it, he said. The kite. You let me hold the string, but it was your strength that lifted it into the sky. You laughed. You laughed so loud that other people turned to watch us. Maye closed her eyes. Slowly. I laughed, she asked. You did, he whispered. She took a long breath and let it out slowly, her eyes still closed. Then, barely audible, tell me again. He smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but the kind born of deep, aching love. He reached over and touched the drawing gently, smoothing the fold in the middle. Okay, he said softly, like a father reading a bedtime story. You made the kite with red fabric and wooden sticks. And he began again, word for word, detail by detail, each sentence slower than the last, like walking a path you don't want to end. His voice grew quieter, more tender, until it was more lullaby than story. Maye leaned back slightly in her chair, her hand still resting in his. Her breathing evened out, and though her eyes remained closed, a faint smile touched her lips. Outside the door, a nurse paused in the hallway. She didn't want to interrupt. She had seen many families struggle to connect, some too afraid to try, others too heartbroken to keep showing up. But this was something different. She stayed silent, her hand on the doorframe, watching through the crack. Inside, Elon glanced toward her, their eyes meeting briefly. One memory restored, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Then he returned his attention to Maye, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his fingers trembling slightly. I still have the kite, he said softly. It's in my closet. I kept it, even when I moved to the US. The fabric is faded, but it still flies. Maye didn't respond, but a single tear rolled down the side of her face, disappearing into the lavender shawl draped over her shoulder. Outside, the wind picked up. The sky beyond the window was clear and wide, painted in soft hues of late afternoon. And high above it all, drifting silently in the air, was a red kite. Imagined or remembered, it didn't matter, dancing against the sky like a promise. The drawer gave a soft wooden sigh as Elon pulled it open. It had been years since anyone had touched its contents, its quiet mess of loose ribbon, receipts, an old sewing kit, and beneath it all, a bundle of folded envelopes tied with a faded piece of blue yarn. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His mother's, shaky but familiar, curved loops that always slanted slightly to the right, ink that had bled slightly into the paper over time, a signature that still looked like her voice might sound, precise, tender, just a little stubborn. Elon sat down on the edge of the bed in the quiet of Maye's old room and untied the string. The stack smelled faintly of old books and lavender, her scent, or at least what his memory insisted was hers. He opened the first letter. It was addressed to him, to be read on your graduation day. He hadn't known it existed. The words danced gently across the page. My dearest Elon, today you walk across a stage, and I hope you feel the ground steady beneath your feet. I hope you know how proud I am, not of your success, but of your heart. Don't rush. Look up. Notice who claps the loudest. And when it's quiet again, remember that no title or award will ever matter more than how you make people feel. He paused, eyes stinging. Another letter, tucked behind the first, was labeled simply, For when your heart is broken. He almost laughed. How had she known? Mothers always do, he supposed. This one was shorter, more urgent in tone. It will hurt more than you expect, and you'll want to fix it, because that's what you do. But let it hurt. Let it break something open. That's how light gets in. Don't shut it away. Love again, even if you're afraid. Especially then. He swallowed hard, tracing the shaky handwriting with his thumb. One by one, he opened more. A letter about courage, one about failure, another about friendship, each a quiet testament to a mother who had once imagined every version of her son's future and had written to meet him there. Later that afternoon, back at the care center, he brought the stack with him. The letters were placed in a leather folder, along with a few carefully chosen photos of moments that matched their contents. His graduation, a candid picture of him at age 12 holding a science fair trophy, a snapshot of the family dog licking his face after his first real heartbreak. Maye was sitting near the window again, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders. The sunlight caught the silver in her hair, making her look, for a moment, like a portrait from another era. "Hi, Mom," he said gently. She looked up, smiling kindly. "Oh, hello there." No trace of recognition, just warmth. Elon sat beside her and opened the leather folder. He removed the first letter and unfolded it slowly, the sound of the paper almost musical in the stillness of the room. "I'd like to read you something," he said. She nodded slightly, tilting her head. He began. She listened quietly, hands folded neatly in her lap, as he read her own words back to her. Her eyes didn't blink much. She wasn't reading ahead with him. She was simply receiving the cadence, as if it were poetry or music that she almost remembered. "You wrote these," Elon said when he finished the first one. "For me." Maye blinked and shook her head gently. "I don't remember." He smiled, not with sorrow but with reverence. "That's okay," he said, "but they remember you." She tilted her head slightly, eyes lingering on his face. He pulled out the letter about courage. He knew it by heart, but he read it again anyway. Courage isn't loud. It's not always bold. Sometimes it's the quietest voice that says, "I'll try again tomorrow." She gave a soft, wistful smile. "Did I really believe in all that?" she asked. Elon nodded. "More than anyone else, Mom." She looked away then, but not because she was drifting. It was as if she were searching within herself for some proof, some echo of the woman who had written those things. Her fingers reached slowly toward the open folder. She touched the corner of a photo. It was him, age 10, standing proudly in a wrinkled suit, holding a medal too large for his neck. She smiled faintly. "You always looked so sure of yourself." "Because I had your voice in my head," he replied. Elon began folding the letters with careful precision, as if they were ancient pages from a sacred text. One by one, he placed them in a small photo album he had brought. It had a navy blue cover and pages thick enough to protect delicate paper. Photos beside letters. Letters beside photos. Memory beside memory. "I'll read one to you every day," he said quietly. Maye reached out and gently took his hand in hers. Her grip was light, uncertain, but warm. He looked at her. Her eyes didn't hold recognition, not quite, but they held presence. She was here, with him, in the moment. Small smiles flickered across her face, then faded, then returned again, like early sunlight breaking through a cloudy morning. "I like that," she said after a long silence. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Her skin was cool, soft, familiar. Outside the window, the world continued without rush or drama. A bird landed on the windowsill and fluttered away. A leaf twisted in the wind. Inside, the air held the quiet weight of something beautiful happening. The photo album lay open on her lap. The sun stretched its fingers across the bed, across their hands, and across the room, as if it, too, were trying to hold on to something fleeting. And for that moment, just that one, nothing was forgotten. The door creaked softly as Elon stepped into the kitchen, guiding the wheelchair gently over the threshold. The light in the room was golden, filtered through curtains that hadn't changed since he was a boy. Someone had carefully restored everything, down to the brass knobs on the cabinets, the checkered curtains, and the antique tile floor that still bore a crack shaped like a lightning bolt near the stove. Maye looked around with mild curiosity. Her eyes moved slowly over the countertops, the worn oak table, the polished copper kettle. She tilted her head slightly, as though the place whispered a language her heart recognized even if her mind did not. "This," Elon said, pausing as he positioned her near the old table, "is where you taught me how to bake bread." He said it softly, as if explaining it to a guest in a museum, though it wasn't a lesson, it had been a ritual. A sacred choreography between mother and son. She had always said the kitchen was where the soul lived. The air was warm, filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and vanilla, an old blend she used to keep in a glass jar above the stove. Elon had asked the staff to fill the room with that scent again, knowing it had a way of reaching the past without asking for permission. Maye's eyes drifted toward the counter, where a wooden spoon sat resting on a folded towel. Its edges were darkened, worn smooth by time and memory. He picked it up and placed it in her hands. He used to say love starts with a wooden spoon and warm hands. Maye looked down at the spoon in her lap. Her fingers closed around the handle. She gave a faint, surprised chuckle, short and uncertain, as though something funny had crossed her mind but vanished before she could grasp it. Elon smiled, and though his heart ached, he cherished even that small flicker of her spirit. "Let's see if we remember how," he said. He pulled out a mixing bowl and gently poured in flour, yeast, water, each action slow and deliberate, more ceremony than recipe. Beside him, Maye watched, occasionally glancing at her hands as though waiting for them to move on their own. Elon placed a ball of dough before her. He tore off a smaller piece and placed it gently into her palm. "Here," he said, "you always said the dough should feel like a baby's cheek." She hesitated, then pressed her fingers slowly into it. The softness surprised her. "It's soft," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Like memory." He looked at her, eyes full of longing and wonder. "Yeah," he said gently, "exactly like that." They worked in silence for a few minutes. Elon kneaded with practiced ease, folding and pressing, folding again. Maye mirrored his movements with slow, deliberate grace. Her hands, though thinner now and lined with age, still carried the rhythm of the past. From the shelf near the window, he pulled out a small kitchen radio, yellowed from years of sun, but still working. He turned the dial, and after a few crackles, the familiar voice of Frank Sinatra filled the air. "Fly me to the moon." Maye's fingers stilled, her head tilted. She closed her eyes and hummed, barely above a whisper, but with the melody just right. "You danced here once," Elon said. "With Dad. I watched you from the hallway." She didn't open her eyes. Instead, she swayed in her chair ever so slightly, her shoulders rocking in time with the music. "I did," she asked. "Yes. You wore a navy blue dress. You were barefoot. The dough was rising, and you and Dad didn't say a word. You just danced." A tear welled in Elon's eye but didn't fall. The past seemed to hover around them now, like steam rising from warm bread. It was in the smell of cinnamon, the echo of a melody, the way her fingers gently traced the edge of the bowl. He stood up slowly, walked to her side, and offered her his hand. She looked at it. Then, with something halfway between memory and trust, she placed her hand in his. He didn't move her from the chair. He simply stood close and swayed with her, side to side, like they had all the time in the world. Her eyes remained closed. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't brush it away. "It feels right," she whispered. Elon kissed the top of her head. "It is." Behind them, the oven timer dinged softly. The bread had risen, just like it used to, just like hope. They stayed there for a moment longer, still moving gently to the music, surrounded by the scent of flour and memory, by the quiet comfort of something familiar returning, not all at once, but in pieces, in feeling, in love. And in the kitchen that once held their laughter, something else rose again. A connection, a warmth, a moment she wouldn't remember the next day, but one Elon would carry forever. The room smelled faintly of lavender and linen when Elon pushed open the door. Sunlight stretched gently across the floor, catching on the polished edges of the object he had labored to bring in quietly that morning, a small, upright piano, weathered but tuned with care. It had once stood in their family living room in Pretoria, the instrument of lullabies, holiday songs, and quiet Sunday afternoons. Now, it stood humbly in the corner of her clinic room, as if waiting to be recognized. Maye sat by the window, dressed in soft cream and blue, her silvery hair catching the sunlight like moonlight over snow. Her expression was serene but distant, her pale blue eyes watching the trees sway outside with no real attachment to the scene. Elon took a seat on the piano bench. "This used to be your favorite song," he said, his voice low and almost apologetic, as though addressing the air between them. He placed his fingers on the keys. A pause. A breath. Then, the opening notes of Clair de Lune floated softly through the room. The melody faltered at first. Elon hadn't played in years. But the notes were there, like familiar footsteps on a long-forgotten path. He let them guide him. His fingers adjusted slowly, feeling their way through memory and muscle. With each phrase, something loosened in his chest. He didn't dare look at her yet. Maye's gaze remained distant, but her breath slowed. Her head tilted slightly, as if some small part of her recognized the air's vibration. When the main theme arrived, its gentle rise and fall like waves on an evening tide, her foot began to tap faintly against the floor. She didn't seem to notice. He smiled to himself. "Do you remember this part?" he asked softly, continuing to play, now steadier. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she began to hum, softly, tentatively, like a thread pulled from deep inside. Her voice was thin, barely a whisper, but she followed the bridge perfectly, as though something in her bypassed the haze of confusion and reached for the music instead. Elon's fingers stopped on the keys, caught in disbelief and awe. He turned toward her. Tears welled in his eyes. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice catching. She turned to him with a smile that was both gentle and unfamiliar. "I don't know who you are," she said with a quiet, graceful honesty, "but I like you." The words hit him like a soft punch. He closed his eyes, nodded once, and smiled through the ache. "Then let me visit you again tomorrow." She nodded gently, her smile still warm, as if granting permission to a stranger she didn't fear. He stayed a while longer. They didn't speak much after that. The room was filled with the kind of silence that didn't ask for words. Before he left, Elon reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden music box. He turned its key once and let it play its soft, mechanical version of Clair de Lune. The tones were brittle, almost broken, but still beautiful. He placed it carefully on her nightstand. "For tonight," he said, "in case the quiet gets too loud." Maye didn't respond, but she touched the box lightly with her fingers, then returned her gaze to the window. Elon stepped out of the room with one last look back, carrying the heavy hush of bittersweetness in his chest. That night, long after visiting hours had ended and the corridors had dimmed into stillness, a nurse passed by Maye's room on her rounds. She paused in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Inside, lit only by the soft halo of a reading lamp, Maye sat upright in bed, her hands slowly turning the key on the music box. The soft strains of Clair de Lune filled the room again. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something behind her eyes. Something alive. A quiet miracle blooming in the dim light. The next morning, Elon returned with a bouquet of small sunflowers and wild daisies. They reminded him of the garden Maye once kept in Pretoria, sunny, unpredictable, always in bloom. As he entered the room, she turned to him, her eyes searching but kind. "I heard you played last night," he said, placing the flowers in a small glass on the window ledge. "You danced with my heart." She didn't respond in words. Perhaps she didn't understand, but her eyes softened and her hand reached for his. That small gesture, fragile and true, said enough. He sat beside her again, and the music box clicked to a stop beside them. She turned to him and asked, "Can you play it again? The one from before?" He nodded, moved beyond speech. He sat down at the piano once more, and as the first notes rang out, they seemed to carry not only the melody but the echo of shared years, the forgotten and the remembered. The song he never forgot was now the bridge between who she had been and who she still was deep inside. And as the light filtered in through the tall window and touched the piano's surface, it caught the reflection of a son and his mother, one playing, the other humming faintly, both suspended in a memory that had never truly let go. Elon arrived just past noon, the sun slanting gently through the large windows of the care home. The light painted soft, golden brushstrokes across the floor, echoing the very feeling he carried with him in his hands, a weathered sketchbook, thick with time. He clutched it like something sacred, something both fragile and immortal. Maye sat in her armchair near the window, a shawl over her shoulders, her gaze fixed on a bird feeder outside. 2 sparrows fluttered and hopped, their small movements commanding her full attention. She didn't notice her son until he crouched beside her, placing the sketchbook gently in her lap. "What's this?" she asked, her pale blue eyes scanning the cover. "My old sketchbook," Elon said softly, as though speaking any louder might break the moment. "I drew in it when I was a kid. Mostly you." She opened it slowly, her fingers delicate, almost reverent. The first page held a pencil sketch of her face in profile, elegant, unguarded, smiling. She turned another page, and another. A cascade of faces emerged, some laughing, some serious, one even tearful, eyes closed and brows furrowed. "I did these after school, remember? You used to nap on the couch. I'd sit nearby with a pencil, pretending I was Michelangelo." He chuckled, but the laughter caught on the edge of a memory. Maye looked up from a drawing of her grinning broadly, eyes wrinkled, mouth wide in mid-laugh. She studied it closely, her expression thoughtful. "You always smiled like this when you made pancakes," Elon said, pointing. "You twirl the spatula and make up a song about syrup. I thought you were magic." Her eyes traced the lines of the drawing. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to place the woman in the paper. "She looks kind," Maye said finally, her voice calm, tinged with wonder. "She is," Elon replied, resting a hand on hers. Maye didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. That small stillness felt like a miracle. Without saying another word, Elon reached for the sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. He pulled a mechanical pencil from his pocket, positioned himself at the foot of her chair, and began to draw again. Maye watched quietly. Her expression shifted, at first puzzled, then intrigued. Her gaze darted between the page and Elon's face as his brow furrowed in concentration. "You draw very well," she said after a long pause. "I had a beautiful muse," he murmured, not looking up. Her cheeks flushed faintly. There was a sparkle, faint but unmistakable, beneath her soft, sea-glass eyes. A kind of pride flickered within her. It was like watching embers glow in a hearth long thought extinguished. When he finished, he turned the pad toward her. The sketch was simple, intimate, her sitting just as she was now, one hand resting on her lap, the other loosely touching her cheek. Her face was relaxed, contemplative, mouth curved into a gentle, almost wistful smile. "Is that me?" she asked. "It's who you are right now," Elon said, "and who you've always been." He carefully tore the page from the pad and placed it inside a wooden frame he had brought from home, wrapped in brown paper. He stood and walked to her nightstand, swapping out an old landscape photograph for this new portrait. The transition felt meaningful, like replacing nostalgia with presence. "Maybe she'll greet you every morning," he said. Maye glanced at the framed sketch, then at him. "I think I'd like her." Elon swallowed, hard. There was something almost unbearable in the way she said it, like a child meeting themselves for the first time and offering grace. A piece of her was still inside, floating through the fog, finding reflections that made sense. And Elon, always the engineer, always the architect of solutions, found himself helplessly grateful for something so fragile and imprecise. He knelt beside her again and touched the edge of the armchair. "I hope," he said quietly, "that maybe you're starting to like yourself again." Maye didn't answer, but she held his gaze longer than usual. She didn't look away, and in that quiet communion, something passed between them, nameless but real. Later that evening, as the nurse entered to check her vitals, she paused by the nightstand. She looked at the framed sketch, and then at Maye, who was gently humming to herself the same soft tune Elon had played 2 days before. "She smiled at your picture today," the nurse whispered to Elon the next morning as he arrived. He paused in the doorway. The air felt heavier, sweeter, like sunlight through old lace curtains. She smiled. The nurse nodded, stepping aside. He walked to her bed and saw the sketch framed beside her, tilted ever so slightly toward the pillow. Maye's eyes were closed, but her mouth was gently upturned, serene. Elon sat beside her, watching her sleep. The kind of sleep that didn't vanish with fear or disorientation, but instead seemed to anchor her somewhere near him. He opened the sketchbook again. "I think," he said softly, more to himself than to her, "tomorrow I'll draw you holding me." The words hovered in the air like pencil dust, soft, invisible, but permanent. He pulled the pencil from his pocket and began to sketch. The moment slowed. The lines on the page took shape not with urgency, but with reverence. A son wrapped in the arms of his mother. Timeless, still, safe. And outside, through the same window they had watched the sparrows from, the morning light broke through again, pouring in like memory. The rain had come gently, the kind that doesn't roar but murmurs, soft and constant like breath against glass. Outside the clinic's wide windows, a gray veil drifted over the world, blurring trees and sidewalks into watercolor smudges. It was the kind of rain Elon remembered from his childhood, the kind his mother used to call storytelling weather. He stood quietly by the window in her room, watching the drops trace down the glass as if retracing forgotten paths. In his hand, he held an old photograph. The edges were worn and the color slightly faded, but the scene was unmistakable. Maye, much younger then, sat on a cushioned window seat, a blanket over her lap, and a steaming mug of tea in one hand. In the other arm, cradled like something sacred, was a young Elon, barely 4 years old, resting against her shoulder. They both gazed out at the rain as if it were a symphony written just for them. "You said rainy days were made for love and tea," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Maye, sitting in her recliner, blinked slowly in his direction. Without another word, he moved into motion. The window seat across the room, recently installed by his request during the clinic's renovations, was the perfect place to recreate the memory. He gently wheeled her over, placing a thick, knitted blanket over her knees, its yarn the same dusky rose as the one in the photo. The rain outside played its part beautifully, tapping softly, keeping rhythm like a loyal accompanist. On the table next to them, a simple ceramic teapot released quiet tendrils of steam into the air. The scent of chamomile and cardamom curled through the room like a memory rising to the surface. Elon poured 2 cups and sat beside her, one leg crossed over the other, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to lean closer to the past. He began to speak, not of rockets, not of meetings or machines, but of stories. The ones she used to tell him. The ones she'd made up on stormy afternoons, wrapped in patchwork quilts, with the smell of wet earth through the window. "You once told me," he began, his voice low and melodic, "that raindrops were just the sky's way of letting go. That clouds cry because they've carried too much." Maye turned her head toward him, slowly, her pale blue eyes catching the soft light. There was a flicker, something nearly imperceptible. Recognition, or just the shadow of a feeling. "I used to like rain, didn't I?" she asked softly. Elon nodded, smiling. "You used to say it cleaned the soul." A pause. Then he reached into his coat pocket and retrieved something unexpected, a small, portable cassette player, the kind he hadn't seen in decades. He clicked it on, and from its tiny speaker came the layered sound of a thunderstorm, followed by a gentle saxophone melody. It was music from her past, jazz that had once filled their kitchen and hallway like perfume. Maye's eyes fluttered closed, her hands resting gently on the blanket. Her breath deepened, and she tilted her face toward the sound like a flower leaning into light. "This feels like something I lost," she whispered. "But not anymore." Elon swallowed the ache in his throat. It came often now, a familiar burn of helplessness and devotion. "I know, Mom," he said, barely above a whisper. "That's why I brought it back." The rain began to slow outside, but neither of them moved. Time had given them this moment, a rare stillness, a reunion not of facts, but of feeling. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a weathered book, Selected Poems by Mary Oliver. The cover had creases, and the pages had been thumbed through so often they were frayed at the corners. He opened to a bookmarked page. "You read this one to me on a day just like this," he said. Then, with a deep breath, he began. "Rain is God's quiet song, a lullaby too vast to sing. And in its hush, we find what's gone. Not lost, just wandering." He paused. Maye's lips moved. She was mouthing the last line along with him. He felt it again, the sunburst beneath his ribs. It wasn't just a memory, it was something alive. Some part of her still sang, still listened, still remembered where the chords were meant to land. They sat there for what felt like hours, sipping tea slowly without speaking. Every now and then, Elon would glance sideways and catch her watching the rain, her expression serene and unknowable. The scent of chamomile and old books wrapped around them like a shawl. Outside, the last of the rain slid down the glass, each drop slow and deliberate, like tears, but not tears of grief, tears of release, of clarity, tears of peace. Inside, Elon leaned back into the cushion, one arm resting behind her shoulders. Maye didn't speak, but her head tilted toward him slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Elon saw it. He felt it. He knew what it meant. The photograph still sat on the small side table, tucked under the edge of the teapot tray. In the image, the past was crystal clear. But here, in the hush after the storm, the present held something just as powerful. Something like love. Something like memory. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and the gentle hum of distant voices in the corridor. Outside, late afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains, painting golden rectangles on the floor. Elon sat in the corner chair, a vintage suitcase resting on his lap like a sacred relic. Its leather was cracked and faded, the buckles tarnished by time, but the handle still strong, like memory itself. He opened it slowly, reverently. The scent of old paper and cedar escaped like a breath held too long. Maye sat upright in her bed, her silver-white hair softly glowing in the sunlight. Her eyes, pale blue and searching, flicked toward the suitcase with vague curiosity. Elon turned it toward her. "It's the suitcase of firsts," he said gently. She tilted her head, puzzled. He reached inside and pulled out a tiny pair of shoes, blue leather, the stitching slightly frayed, soles almost untouched. "These were mine," he said, smiling faintly. "My first shoes. You said I walked too early, then ran too fast." Maye's lips parted in a hint of a smile. She leaned forward, inspecting the tiny shoes. "They're small." "So was I," he chuckled, placing them gently in her lap. Next came a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly and held it so she could see. "My first report card," he explained. "From when I was 5. You kept every single one. Look, talkative, curious, affectionate." That's what it said. Maye squinted at the page, eyes flicking over the faded ink. "Affectionate," she repeated softly, the word lingering on her tongue like a distant flavor. "Was that true?" "It still is," he said quietly. From beneath the stack of papers, he retrieved something fragile, nestled inside an old book cover, a dried flower pressed between wax paper. Its petals were brittle but still clung to a soft violet hue. "You gave me this," he said, "the day I left home. You tucked it in my suitcase and told me, 'Don't forget where you come from.'" He handed it to her carefully. Maye accepted it with both hands, cradling it as if it were still alive. "It's fragile," she whispered. "So was I," he replied, "but you made me strong." She blinked slowly, the flower trembling slightly in her grasp. Her fingers, though aged, still moved with a dancer's grace. One by one, he placed small relics in her lap. A crumpled drawing he had made at age 6 of the two of them flying a kite. A plastic dolphin figurine he had begged for during their first trip to the aquarium. A single yellowing photo booth strip of them making silly faces, his young cheeks round with laughter, her arm wrapped around him, protective and proud. Then, from the very bottom of the suitcase, he pulled a weathered ticket stub. The corners were curled and faded, but the print was still legible. Port Elizabeth, Ocean View, one way. Maye squinted. What is it? Our trip to the sea, Elon said. You took me there after Dad died. I was 7. I cried the whole way there and laughed the whole way back. You danced in the waves like the world hadn't hurt you. She looked at him with a slow blink, then down at the ticket again. I like the sea, she asked, almost apologetically. You loved it, he said. It was the first time I saw you happy after everything. Maye let out a faint chuckle. Then I must have been happy. He gently placed the ticket on top of the other keepsakes in her lap, then closed the suitcase halfway and carried it to the foot of her bed, letting it remain ajar, as if inviting memory to come and go as it pleased. It's yours, Mom, he said, his voice thick. Just as I am. She turned her head to look at him, eyes studying his face for a long, quiet moment. Then, without thinking, she reached out and touched his cheek, her thumb brushing the corner of his mouth, just like she used to when he was a boy. You're very kind, she said. The tone was gentle, as though she were recognizing something precious in a stranger. Elon closed his eyes, just for a second. I learned it from you. The room was still again, full of invisible weight. Between them, the suitcase rested like a bridge to something not entirely lost. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting warm amber light across her blanket. Her fingers still lingered near his face, then fell softly back to the coverlet. That night, a nurse tiptoed in to check on her and noticed the suitcase still open. Maye was asleep, one hand resting on the photo booth strip. The dried flower had been set gently on her nightstand beside the small dolphin figurine. And in her expression, even in sleep, was something almost impossible to describe. Not joy, not clarity, but something softer, a recognition. The next morning, when Elon arrived, he found her awake. She was staring at the open suitcase with a furrowed brow, as though trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle that mattered more than any other. She looked up when he entered, and for a brief second, her gaze held. You came back, she said simply. He nodded. I always do. The pressed flower lay beside her again, and her hand reached for it absent-mindedly. It's fragile, she said. He smiled gently, but still whole. And as the sunlight spilled into the room like a silent promise, the suitcase of first stayed open at the foot of the bed, its contents humming with invisible music, each object a note, a memory, a spark. Somewhere in the corner of her heart, a small, trembling hope began to bloom. Not yet a memory, but something close enough to hold. Elon guided the wheelchair carefully over the cobblestone path that led to the therapy garden behind the clinic. The late morning sun draped its golden fingers over the hedges, the soft rustling of leaves blending with the distant coo of doves. Bees hummed low over blossoms. Maye sat still, her pale blue eyes reflecting the movement of light through the trees. She wore her silvery white hair loose today, and a wide-brimmed straw had shielded her porcelain skin. They came to a small patch of freshly turned soil near the edge of a stone bench. Elon paused, then knelt beside a flat of young lavender plants. He looked up at her, his voice laced with something between joy and mourning. You always said lavender smelled like grace, he said, picking up a stem and crushing it lightly between his fingers. Maye leaned forward, reaching out with a trembling hand. Her fingertips brushed against the purple bloom, and her lips parted in a soft smile. It's familiar, she said, not fully understanding, but not needing to. Elon nodded. From the old house in Pretoria. You planted it right under the kitchen window. Every breeze smelled like calm. He reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a stack of old photographs, slightly curled at the edges. He handed her one gently. In it, a young Maye, no more than 35, knelt in a garden with sunlight pouring over her face. A toddler Elon stood beside her, holding a tiny plastic watering can with intense seriousness. You took this one morning, he said, after pancakes. You said a garden only grows if you talk to it kindly. She looked at the photo for a long moment, her eyes trailing across the colors. "She looks happy," she murmured. "She was," Elon replied, "and she named a rose after me." Maye gave a soft chuckle, just a puff of breath through her nose. Sounds like something a mother would do. From the bench, Elon picked up a small garden trowel and handed it to her. Her fingers curled around the handle instinctively, even though her movements were slow. He helped her guide the tool to the earth, where she scooped up a neat pocket of soil. "I brought mint," he said. "You used to put in everything, tea, salads, even lemonade I didn't want." She gave a faint smile. "This is nice," she whispered. "Peaceful." "Like the afternoons we used to share," Elon said. His voice had a texture to it, like weathered paper. They planted in quiet companionship, her mint beside his lavender, their hands occasionally brushing in the dirt. The garden around them breathed gently, roses, marigolds, ivy curling over wooden trellises. A breeze swept through the hedges. Just then, a hummingbird darted into view, its wings a shimmering blur. It hovered by a flower and then zipped near Maye's shoulder, pausing like a floating emerald. She gasped with childlike delight. "It's beautiful," she said, eyes wide. Elon smiled, leaning closer. "They say hummingbirds carry messages from heaven." She tilted her head and looked toward the blue sky, eyes blinking back something unspoken. "Then someone must be watching us," she said softly. Without a word, Elon picked up her cardigan from the back of the chair and draped it around her shoulders. The motion was fluid, practiced, one he hadn't done since he was 15, and she'd fallen asleep on the porch swing one cold autumn afternoon. She leaned into it, her frame folding delicately like paper, and he remembered how she used to curl around him during thunderstorms, whispering that no storm lasts forever. They dug another hole together, this time no talking. Just hands and dirt and the smell of earth. The silence between them wasn't empty, it pulsed with shared lifetimes. Once the planting was done, Elon stood and brushed soil from his knees. From the bag, he pulled a small wooden plaque. The letters were carved deep and painted gold, Maye's Garden of Memory. He knelt again and pressed it gently into the soil at the edge of their patch. Maye looked at it, her brow furrowed in thought. She read the words aloud, halting but clear. Maye's Garden of Memory. She didn't seem to fully grasp it, but the cadence of the phrase pleased her. She smiled. "I like that garden," she said. Elon's voice nearly caught. "So do I." The sun shifted, casting a soft beam over her face. She tilted her head to it instinctively, and in that moment, she looked ageless, timeless. Like the woman who had once knelt in a garden in Pretoria, laughing in the dirt while a boy tried to bury a spoon. Later that evening, a nurse passed by the garden from inside the clinic. The light was fading. Most patients had returned to their rooms. But from the window, she saw the silhouette of Maye, still seated in the garden, fingers brushing over a mint leaf, humming faintly to herself. The plaque glowed faintly in the golden light, as if the memory it honored had taken root not just in soil, but in something deeper. Inside the clinic, Elon watched from a hallway corner. He didn't disturb her. He simply stood still, a half step out of time, allowing the day to hold its breath a little longer. And as night fell, the garden stayed warm. A space not of loss, but of return. Of lavender and mint. Of small roots growing strong beneath the earth. Of yesterday's blooming quietly into hope. The idea came to Elon one sleepless night, long after the hallway lights of the clinic had dimmed and only the faint buzzing of the nurse's station echoed faintly through the walls. He sat in the family room with a notebook on his lap, its pages stubbornly blank, the pen poised between his fingers like an anchor. Outside, the moonlight bled through a partially drawn curtain, spilling over an old family photo resting on the side table. His mother, holding him as a child, laughing with the wind in her hair. It struck him then, not as a thunderclap, but as a whisper. Write it down. All of it. Not for the world, not for acclaim. For her. A book of memories, his memories of her, the life she gave him, the gentleness that shaped him. A testament. A gift. He titled it, For My Mother Who Taught Me the Sky. Each chapter was a standalone memory. Some glowed brightly, Others were faint silhouettes shaped more by feeling than fact. The first chapter was about a rainy day in Pretoria when they'd gotten lost on the way to a school recital. He'd been scared, maybe 6 or 7, tears hot on his cheeks. But Maye had really laughed, and told him getting lost was just another way of finding adventure. That moment, though simple, had cracked open a lifelong belief in possibility. Every night, Elon brought the book to her room. He never said he was the author. It was more magic that way. He'd sit beside her bed, the corners of the clinic room dimly lit by a lamp with a faded yellow shade, and begin. Chapter 2. The time you painted the kitchen ceiling because you said it looked too serious. Maye listened, her pale blue eyes sometimes focusing, sometimes drifting. At moments, her brow furrowed, as if a name hovered just beyond her grasp. At others, her smile came without thought, rising like the tide of a remembered emotion. One night, as he closed the book and placed it gently on her blanket-covered lap, she looked at him and said, "You're a good writer." He swallowed hard before replying, "You were my first reader." She nodded, though whether she understood or simply liked the sound of his voice, he wasn't sure. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the way she cradled the book after each reading, as if it were something fragile and holy. He had chosen every detail carefully. The hardcover was wrapped in a soft ivory cloth, with her name embossed in gold on the inside page. The font was large and spaced apart, easy on tired eyes. Each memory was followed by a photo or a small drawing. One chapter was just a story about the time he'd cried over a crushed bird egg, and how she'd held him and said, "Gentleness is strength, my boy. Don't ever trade it for noise." He highlighted that line in the book and read it slowly one evening. "You taught me that gentleness is strength." She repeated the words under her breath, frowning softly as if trying to pin them down in her mind. Then she nodded. "That sounds like something I would say." In the dedication, he had written, "Even if you forget me, I'll remember for both of us." That sentence, more than any other, stayed with him. It was truth and promise, and the echo of everything he couldn't fix. One evening, after finishing Chapter 9, "The first time I saw you cry and understood what bravery meant," Maye leaned over and kissed his forehead. It was unprompted, soft, and full of something ancient. She didn't say a word after, and Elon didn't ask why. He let the moments settle between them, like snow. The book stayed with her after that. Every night, it lay by her pillow, her hand often resting on it even in sleep. Nurses began to notice. Some thought it was a children's book, others assumed it was religious. One nurse, Mira, found a folded page during a routine night check. Curiously, she opened to the marked chapter. "The day I knew you loved me." It described a moment from Elon's childhood, a quiet Sunday afternoon when Maye, worn from work and worry, had chosen to sit on the floor and build a Lego rocket with him for hours. No phones, no distractions. Just laughter and warm light and connection. Elon wrote, "In that quiet time, I understood love wasn't loud. It didn't need speeches or explanations. It simply stayed when it didn't have to." When Mira told him about the page Maye had folded, his throat tightened. He nodded, biting the inside of his cheek to keep the emotion steady. "Maybe she didn't forget everything," he whispered. The idea to share the book came naturally. He printed 50 copies, softbound this time, and delivered them anonymously to the geriatric wing of the hospital. The cover simply read, "For my mother." No author listed. No explanation needed. The nurses told him later that one man with early-stage dementia had cried reading it, thinking it was written by his own son. Elon didn't need credit. What he needed was to build a bridge between memory and presence for others who, like him, were trying to hold on to someone who was slowly drifting out to sea. The final chapter of the first volume ended with the lines, "Memory is not just what we keep. It's what we give away, hoping it will take root somewhere else." But he wasn't done. Inspired by her reactions, the flickers of recognition, the moments of deep emotion, the instinctual affection that defied the disease, he began writing the second book. She remembered with her heart. This time, the stories weren't from his memory but from hers, or at least what remained. He pieced them together from old journals, her speeches, magazine interviews, even recipes. Stories of her modeling career, of standing up for herself in boardrooms, of reading bedtime stories in a South African accent thick with warmth and music. Some nights, he caught her smiling at a sentence before he read it aloud. Other times, she corrected his phrasing. "That's not how I said it," she would murmur, and he would grin, letting her win. These books became more than a ritual. They were a lifeline, connecting the present with the past, the mother she had been with the woman she was now. And maybe, just maybe, helping both of them remember who they still were. The cardboard box was worn at the edges, the tape yellowed, the ink on the label nearly vanished. Elon ran a hand across its surface, hesitant. He had found it buried deep in the storage room of their old house in Pretoria, stacked beneath obsolete modems and tangled cords from forgotten devices. When he lifted the lid, the scent of old plastic and dust of decades past wafted up. Inside were VHS tapes, black, clunky, unlabeled except for a few with smudged handwriting. Bike Day, Sing for Sleep, Seaside 79. He carried the box back to the lab section of the memory clinic, where one of the technicians, fascinated by the analog trove, offered to help digitize them. Elon watched frame by frame as flickering childhood spilled back into motion. There was something surreal in the grainy images, like ghosts learning to smile again. He selected the first one, Bike Day. The screen blinked blue before springing to life. A grainy, sun-drenched street appeared, Elon, no older than 6, wobbling on a training-wheeled bicycle, while a younger Maye jogged behind him, laughing breathlessly. "Come on, Elon, you've got this," she called out on the video, her voice bright, energetic, unmistakably hers. The boy fell. There was a moment of stillness. Then the camera shook as someone ran, likely a friend or sibling holding the camcorder, and Maye was on the ground with him, wrapping him in an enormous hug, laughing as if failure was the funniest thing that had ever happened. Back in the present, Elon sat silently at the desk, hand on his mouth, not sure if he wanted to smile or cry. That evening, he brought a small portable projector into Maye's room. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled faintly of lavender lotion and fresh linens. She was seated in her usual armchair by the window, a shawl over her shoulders, staring out at nothing. "I found something," Elon said softly. He adjusted the projector and cast the image onto the white wall across from her. The lamp was dimmed. The tape began to play. Light danced onto the wall, and in seconds, the room was filled with laughter, not theirs in the present, but theirs from decades ago. The boy appeared. The bike. The fall. The camera wobbled. Maye's voice rang out from the wall, filled with energy. Maye's eyes widened slightly. She leaned forward. Her lips parted, soundlessly at first, and then a chuckle. A small, light laugh that escaped before she could catch it. It surprised even her. "That's you," Elon said, beaming, turning to her. "Is it?" she whispered, eyebrows lifting. He nodded, stepping closer. "That's you teaching me not to fear falling." Her gaze stayed on the image. "I must have been brave then," she murmured, as if talking to someone in the distant corners of her own mind. "You still are," Elon replied, his voice tight with emotion. They watched together in silence, the flickering video washing over the walls like sunlight from another lifetime. In another clip, Maye was singing, sitting on the edge of a twin bed with tiny Elon under the blankets. Her voice, soft and melodic, filled the room like a lullaby stitched in time. Elon felt something inside him unravel slowly. He closed his eyes. He could almost smell the faint scent of powder and linen from that small childhood bedroom. Her voice back then had been warm, unfiltered by age. He opened his eyes to find her hand gently placed at her throat, as though searching for that version of her voice in the folds of memory. "I used to sing a lot, didn't I?" she asked, not quite expecting an answer. Elon reached over and took her hand, giving it a small squeeze. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The clip ended. The screen dimmed. The projector's quiet hum faded into silence. But something lingered, like the way a song remains in the air even after the last note has played. Maye sat very still, looking at the wall long after it had gone blank. Her eyes were not sad nor confused, but far away, thoughtful, as if something had stirred and not quite settled. She turned her head slightly toward Elon. "Did I sing to you every night?" "Pretty much," he said. "Even when I was too old to admit I liked it." She smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was steady. A small warmth flickered in her expression, faint but alive. They sat together, wordless again, just listening to the silence now rich with memory. Elon stood and moved the projector aside. He placed the digitized tablet on her nightstand and labeled the folder, Laughter Tapes. Then he brought out a new small photo album he'd compiled, stills from the videos, printed and dated. He handed it to her. She flipped the pages slowly, pausing at each frame as if it might speak. She reached one image, her younger self kneeling in the grass, holding Elon by the waist as he teetered on the bike. "You were so small," she said, "but so determined. You told me to keep going." "I must have loved you very much," she said with sudden certainty. "You still do," Elon whispered, his voice catching. The room fell quiet again. Not heavy, not hollow, just full. A few minutes later, Maye dozed off with the photo album resting lightly on her lap. Elon covered her gently with the soft plaid blanket that always lived at the foot of her bed. He stood near the door, hand on the frame, watching her chest rise and fall. The shadows of the moving tree branches outside swayed across the wall, slow, rhythmic, like the gentle motion of a cradle. Something in her sleep shifted, a faint smile on her lips. And for a moment, Elon could almost believe that time had folded in on itself, that the woman in the chair was both mother and memory, presence and past, melody and silence. The tape had ended, but the laughter remained. The night had settled softly over the clinic, the kind of quiet that only comes when a world seems to hold its breath. Outside, the garden lamps glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the stone path that led to the rear veranda. It was there that Elon found her, his mother, wrapped in a light shawl, her silvery hair gleaming under the hush of starlight. Maye sat perfectly still in the old wicker chair, her back straight despite the hours. Her pale blue eyes were fixed upward, searching something in the sky with an expression that seemed to balance between wonder and ache. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, one finger absently tracing the edge of her shawl. Elon approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. He stood beside her for a moment without speaking, then finally lowered himself onto the bench beside her, their shoulders close but not touching. "The stars look different here," Maye said, her voice gentle but alert. There was no confusion in her tone, only a quiet noticing, the way a poet might whisper a truth too fragile to say aloud. Elon looked up, following her gaze. The sky was clear, deep navy, and studded with pinpricks of silver, scattered like secrets waiting to be named. "You used to name constellations with me," he said after a moment, almost as if reminding the sky as much as her. "Remember?" He pointed upward, tracing a familiar pattern with his finger. "See that? Orion. You taught me that one." Said he was a warrior, always searching the horizon for something he lost. Maye tilted her head slightly. "Orion," she repeated, the word soft on her lips, like a note in a forgotten melody. Then, after a pause, "Yes. And that's the North Star you called it our lighthouse." He turned toward her. "You always said it would guide us home if we ever got lost." Silence fell again, but it was a gentle silence, thick with memory, tender with the echo of years past. Only the soft rustle of the wind moved between them. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was stronger than he expected, firm and deliberate. Elon looked down at their hands entwined, hers thinner now, delicate, like pressed parchment, but still warm. "You're my boy, aren't you?" she asked, not with doubt, but with fragile hope, like someone placing a key in a lock they're not sure will turn. He swallowed hard, his voice caught before he could answer. "Yes, Mom. I'm Elon." Maye's breath shuddered, like something inside her had just fallen gently into place. She looked at him, really looked, her eyes suddenly focused with a clarity he hadn't seen in months. "Elon," she whispered, as though tasting the word, memorizing its shape. "Elon." And then, her lips trembled into a smile. "You built rockets." He laughed quietly, his chest tightening. "Because you taught me to reach," he said. Something sparkled behind her eyes then, not just recognition, but pride. For a heartbeat, time rewound. She was the mother who once stitched his cape out of an old curtain, who stayed up past midnight quizzing him on physics questions far beyond his grade, who whispered encouragements through cracked bedroom doors. Without warning, she leaned forward and pulled him into a sudden embrace. It startled him, not because it was strange, but because it was so familiar. It was the way she used to hug him after school plays, or when he came home bruised from neighborhood scuffles. There was a strength in it, still. A memory of how fiercely she'd once protected her little boy against a world too vast. "I knew I loved someone very much," she murmured into his shoulder, her voice breaking. "I just didn't remember who." His arms closed around her tighter. His eyes burned. "You remembered the most important part," he whispered. Tears slipped down his cheek and dampened her shawl. He didn't wipe them away. Some things deserved to fall. "And I loved you first," she said into the crook of his neck. Then she leaned back just far enough to place her hand against his cheek, her thumb brushing the edge of his jaw. They sat like that for a long time, rocked only by the gentle rhythm of night air, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. The stillness wasn't empty, it was sacred, as though the world had paused to bear witness to something far more enduring than memory, love remembered by the heart when the mind could no longer hold the weight. At the doorway to the veranda, the nurse who had cared for Maye these many months stood quietly. She didn't interrupt. Her hand covered her mouth, and her eyes brimmed with tears. She had seen many families come and go, but this moment was rare. A glimmer of self breaking through the clouds. A name remembered. A bond unbroken. Out in the vast indigo canvas above them, a star shot across the sky, sudden and bright. Maye turned to look, her eyes following its path. "A shooting star," she whispered. Elon smiled, still holding her hand. "Maybe the universe wanted us to know it saw us tonight." She nodded once, barely perceptible, her gaze still aloft. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yes," Elon agreed, his voice quiet. "So are you." And for a moment longer, they stayed together beneath the stars, beneath the history they'd made and the love that endured, watching the night stretch onward, bound by memory, by sky, by a name spoken softly in the dark. The morning light drifted in gently through the gauzy curtains, painting the walls of a room with soft strokes of gold. It was still early, the air hushed, but Maye Musk was already awake. She lay on her side, her head propped slightly on the pillow, pale blue eyes wide open and calm, lucid in a way that had become rare. There was no confusion on her face, no blank searching, only quiet presence. When Elon pushed the door open with his usual cautious tenderness, carrying a tray with warm tea and a slice of peach toast, she turned her head toward him and smiled. Not the polite, unsure kind she sometimes offered strangers she didn't remember. No, this smile was certain, grounded, familiar. "Good morning, my son," she said, her voice steady and clear. Elon froze mid-step, the tray trembling slightly in his hands. His eyes widened, his breath caught. "You remember me," he whispered, as if afraid his voice might break the spell. "Of course." "Don't be silly," Maye said with a playful chuckle, lifting herself upright. "Who else would come in here looking like a boy who just saw a ghost?" He set the tray down, still stunned. Mom," he muttered, blinking quickly. "It's been a while since." "I know," she said gently, resting a hand on his. "But I'm here today." It was as though the universe had handed them a miracle without fanfare. No thunder, no lightning, just a quiet morning where everything that had been lost had momentarily returned. Elon sat beside her, unsure of how to hold the moment without crushing it. "What would you like to do today, Mom?" "Everything," she said without hesitation, her voice light but full of conviction. "Everything we loved." And so they began. The garden was their first stop. He wrapped a scarf around her neck, even though the sun was kind, and she took his arm with that quiet dignity she'd never lost. Slowly, they walked past flower beds she once designed, her gaze sweeping over the roses, the violets, the lavender bush. She reached toward a particular bloom, soft pink with a deeper magenta center, and her lips parted in recognition. "Elon's bloom," she said, eyes twinkling. He turned to her in surprise. "You remember the name?" "I named it after you, didn't I?" she replied with a proud tilt of her chin. "Because it was stubborn to grow but too brilliant to ignore." He laughed, a quiet, grateful sound, and they kept walking, circling the garden like a carousel of memories. She recalled things without prompting. The time he chased a squirrel through the tulips, the bird that nested in the honeysuckle, the summer when they tried growing sunflowers and failed spectacularly. Back in the room, she eased herself into her armchair with a sigh of contentment. "Play the tape again," she said. Elon didn't need to ask which one. He placed the small projector on the dresser and adjusted the focus until the image danced on the wall, the grainy footage of a young Maye teaching a wobbly boy to ride a bike. As the sound filled the room, her voice, her laughter, Maye began to hum along. And then, slowly, she began to sing. The song she had once used to lull him to sleep came back to her like breath, unforced, unbroken. Her voice was softer now, but no less full. "You never stop singing," Elon said, his voice thick. She touched her throat, surprised by her own memory. "Your voice never left me," he added quietly. Afterward, she opened the book he'd written for her. Her fingers moved with purpose now, not trembling with doubt, but deliberate with recognition. She found a chapter she loved and began reading aloud. "You were a mischievous little boy," she said with a smirk, "always trying to fly off the couch like it was a rocket." "Practice," he shrugged, smiling. "Early training." They had tea in porcelain cups with bluebirds painted on the side, cups they used to save for guests. But today they celebrated. He sliced pears and added honey, just like she had when he was 7. They sat across from each other, no rush in their gestures, just the quiet ticking of a clock neither of them feared today. As the afternoon light faded to amber, Maye reached across the table and held his hand with surprising firmness. "Obrigada," she said, her voice steady. "Por não desistir de mim." Elon looked at her for a long moment, his throat tight. "You never gave up on me first." By evening, the room was dim and still. The nurse had brought a small speaker and played the same classical playlist Maye used to listen to while baking: Debussy, Satie, Chopin. Maye lay back on her bed and Elon settled beside her, not on a chair this time, but next to her, side by side like children watching clouds. The music wrapped around them like a blanket of sound. Neither spoke. There was no need. The day had been a gift neither dared to expect, and now they simply let it hold them. Maye's breathing was even. Her head tilted slightly toward her son's. Her hand remained in his warm, real present. Elon closed his eyes. He thought of all the things she might forget again tomorrow. But if this was the last clear day, if this was the only time she'd ever look at him again and say his name with joy and certainty, it was enough. The days that followed were like the tide, coming in, going out. Maye's memory flowed and ebbed with a rhythm all its own. Some mornings, her gaze would lock onto Elon's with unshakable clarity, her eyes twinkling as she greeted him by name. Other times, her expression would cloud with gentle confusion, and she would call him the kind visitor. Each time, Elon's heart clenched, but he never corrected her. He didn't need to be recognized to love her. He just did. One afternoon, after watching her drift into sleep for the 3rd time that day, Elon walked through the quiet hallway of the house and found an old rectangular mirror stored in the linen closet. It wasn't fancy, framed in pale wood, slightly scuffed on one corner, but it was tall, clear, and honest. He brought it into her room and positioned it across from the bed, where she could see it as soon as she opened her eyes. Then, using a thin red lipstick he found in her drawer, a shade called Morning Rose, he wrote on the glass in calm, rounded letters. "You are Maye. You are loved. She woke that evening to the reflection of herself in the mirror, her silvery hair a halo in the dusk light, the words floating gently over her image. She blinked slowly, then smiled at her own face as though meeting it for the first time. "Is that for me?" she asked softly. Elon nodded. "Every day, Mom." From that moment, the mirror became a companion. Each morning, she would sit up with help, smooth her pillow, and gaze at her reflection with quiet curiosity. "You are May," she read aloud, sometimes with a hint of amusement, other times with a breathless reverence, like the sentence contained a secret too large to hold. "You are loved," she would whisper, as though reminding herself of something buried deep in her bones. One gray morning, as the rain tapped gently against the window panes, May turned to Elon with a furrowed brow. "Did I love deeply?" she asked, her voice trembling like a piano note barely struck. Elon's throat tightened, but he didn't hesitate. "With everything you had," he said, "with every heartbeat, with every corner of your soul." She stared into the mirror a moment longer, watching her lips as though hoping the answer had been written there. "But I don't feel them," she murmured. "Those memories, they don't live here anymore." Elon sat beside her and took her hand. "That's okay," he said gently, "because I feel them for both of us now." He reached into the box of old family photos and pulled out one of his favorites, a black and white shot of them dancing in the kitchen when he was 7, barefoot on the tile, his small feet on top of hers as she twirled them both. He held it up beside the mirror. "That was love," he said. Her eyes scanned the image. "She looks like someone who would love dancing," she said, not fully realizing the woman in the photo was her. "She did," Elon replied, a smile breaking through the ache. "And she taught me to dance through the chaos." That afternoon, Elon picked up the lipstick again and began drawing on the mirror, small hearts along the border, then stars like the ones they used to trace in the sky. "You're silly," May said, watching the shapes form. Her laughter was light, unexpected, and it lifted the room. "You raised me like that," Elon replied, grinning. She watched him draw with a childlike wonder, as if each shape brought back a shimmer of memory. Then, looking past the lipstick hearts, she noticed their reflections, her and Elon, side by side, two people frozen in a moment between forgetting and remembering. "We look happy," she said after a pause. "We are," Elon replied. And though he knew tomorrow might be different, today he believed it. Believed it so deeply, it echoed in the center of his chest. The mirror became part of their daily ritual. Each morning, she greeted it like an old friend. "Good morning, May," she'd whisper to herself, then smile and turn to Elon. "He left a message again," she'd say, pointing to the lipstick words. Every few days, he added something new. A butterfly, a music note, a sun with wide rays. He didn't care if it looked childish. He only cared that it made her smile. One morning, as golden light filtered through the curtains and birds chirped outside, May reached out to touch her reflection. Her hand hovered just above the glass. Then she turned to Elon and said softly, "I like me, and I like you." Elon's eyes filled. "I like you too, Mom, so very much." And for a breathless moment, they sat in silence, watching the two figures in the mirror who somehow looked so full of peace. May studied their images, hers elegant and luminous despite the years, and his strong yet softened, the lines on his face etched with tenderness. "What do you see?" he asked. "I see someone who matters," she replied. Then, after a pause, she added, "and someone who never left." That night, when she drifted off to sleep, Elon didn't turn off the lamp. He sat in the armchair by the foot of her bed and looked at the mirror one last time. The lipstick writing shimmered faintly in the light. "You are May. You are loved." Beneath it, their reflections rested together in the stillness of the moment. Two people suspended in love, memory, and something more timeless than either. And Elon thought, even if everything else fades, this mirror of her heart will stay. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Elon stood at the doorway for a moment, taking in the quiet space he had worked on for weeks in secret. It wasn't large, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that every detail had been chosen with memory in mind, with love as the architect. He'd had the sterile white walls covered in a delicate floral wallpaper, soft green vines curling around faded roses. It was nearly identical to the one that had lined the hallway of their old house in Pretoria when he was just a boy. He remembered running his fingers along the ridges of that wallpaper, tracing imaginary paths as his mother hummed in the kitchen. Now the pattern seemed to hum back at him. In the corner by the window sat a worn blue armchair, an exact replica of the one he used to curl up in while Maye read to him. It had taken weeks to find someone who could recreate it from an old photograph. But there it was, high back, round arms, the upholstery a little coarse, just like before. And next to it on a small side table was a stack of books Maye once loved, poems by Neruda, essays by Emerson, and the cookbook she always swore by even though she rarely followed recipes. Near the wall, he'd placed a vintage turntable. The real deal. Not one of those modern replicas, but a heavy, wood-frame player with brass knobs and the warm scent of aged vinyl. Beside it stood a modest shelf, already filled with the family's old records, Billie Holiday, Miriam Makeba, the Beatles, and Chopin, whom Maye once claimed taught her how to breathe when the world felt too loud. And finally, in his hands, he carried the newest edition, a thick, freshly printed photo album titled Their Journey, embossed in gold on soft leather. He stepped into the room with it, heart brimming and throat tight. Maye was sitting on the bed, her silvery hair catching the light like spun glass. She was dressed in a powder blue knit cardigan and beige slacks, looking every bit the woman who had walked through life with grace and poise, even as time tried to unright her. She turned toward him, her pale blue eyes curious but calm. "This is us," Elon said softly, holding the album in both hands like a sacred object. Page by page. He sat beside her, and they opened it together. The first image was black and white, Maye in her 20s, holding a baby Elon, both of them caught in a rare, candid laugh. Her eyes flickered over the image with wonder, fingertips hovering above the page, before finally resting gently on it. "You were so small," she said, the memory a soft ember inside her voice. Elon chuckled, "And you were radiant." They turned the pages slowly. Maye paused at some, smiled at others. A picture of Elon and Kimball playing in a pile of leaves. One of Tosca in a ballet recital. Elon's science fair ribbon. Maye's modeling headshots. Family dinners, awkward birthdays, and a grainy photo of them at a theme park with cotton candy clutched in hand. She touched that one twice. "I remember this day," she murmured. "It rained just after this, didn't it?" He nodded, amazed. "Yes. We all ran for cover and ended up drenched anyway." Not every memory returned. Some pages were met with blankness. She would tilt her head as if trying to summon something from far away, then smile vaguely and move on. But her eyes never dulled. They sparkled with trust, with warmth, even in the absences. "You make me feel known," she said quietly. Elon looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes. "That's because you've always been unforgettable." She laughed, a full, rich laugh that seemed to chase shadows from the corners of the room. "Even when I forget." He reached for her hand, especially then. They sat in silence for a while, her hand resting on the album as though it kept her tethered to something important. Then Elon stood and walked to the turntable. He chose one of the older records, a Billie Holiday classic, and let the crackling sound fill the air like a memory coming to life. Maye leaned back into the pillows as the music began, her eyes closing. Elon returned to her side, and without a word, she opened her arms to him. He sank into the embrace, resting his head on her shoulder. The music wrapped around them, the soft hiss and hum of it syncing with the rhythm of her breath. "Thank you for everything, Mom," he whispered, almost inaudibly. She tightened her grip on his hand, her strength surprising in that moment. "I hope heaven has gardens," she said, her voice drifting like a feather caught in sunlight. "It will," he replied with quiet certainty. "And you'll plant lavender." Her lips curved into a tired smile. "Then I'll be home." Elon looked down at their hands, interlaced like branches of the same tree. His fingers brushed the fine creases of her skin, memorizing them, as if her touch might fade with the sun and he need to draw it again someday. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, slowly, reverently. Not out of habit, but out of gratitude, out of devotion, out of all the things words couldn't carry anymore. Outside the window, a breeze stirred the curtains. A wind that smelled faintly of spring, of coming change. But inside the room, time had folded just for a little while. They weren't defined by what had been forgotten, but by what remained, love. Daily, unshakable, built with quiet gestures and sacred remembering. The music played on. Time, in its quiet cruelty, had continued to move. Days folded into weeks like soft linens on a forgotten shelf. Maye Musk, once vivacious, witty, brimming with a quiet power that had shaped generations, now moved within the stillness of her condition. The disease didn't rage, it whispered. A delicate, relentless erosion that stole pieces of her in the gentlest way imaginable. She slept more now. Her words came less frequently, and when they did, they floated like dandelion seeds, fragile, slow, precious. But her eyes still knew Elon. When he entered the room each morning, carrying a tray with 2 cups of chamomile tea and an old jazz record under his arm, her lips lifted in a faint but unmistakable smile. Elon had built a rhythm around her fading presence. Morning tea by the window, stories read aloud from her favorite childhood books, music from a time when her hands still braided his hair, and doodles they drew together, him sketching stars, her naming them. One morning, the routine broke. He stepped into the room and was met not by her soft smile or the faint hum of music, but by silence. The kind of silence that seemed to hum with finality. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a pale gold over everything. The floral wallpaper looked faded. The record player was still. And Maye was lying on the bed, her frame smaller than he remembered, her hands folded neatly over her chest. He didn't panic. He didn't speak. He simply stood at the threshold, breathing in the moment, letting it settle into his chest like the last page of a novel you don't want to end. Then he saw the mirror. Drawn in her favorite coral lipstick was a small, imperfect heart. And beside it, in the same trembling hand that had once braided his hair and baked him apple tarts and stitched buttons onto his shirts, were the words, "Thank you, my boy." Elon crossed the room slowly and sat beside her. He reached for her hand, cool but not yet distant, and cradled it between his own. The stillness wasn't frightening. It was sacred. Hours passed. He didn't leave. He didn't speak. He simply stayed, his thumb gently tracing the back of her hand, as if trying to memorize her skin. And then, just as the morning stretched toward afternoon, she stirred. Her eyes opened, not cloudy, not lost, clear, present, piercing. "It's time, isn't it?" she whispered, not as a question, but as a truth already known. Elon didn't answer. Words would have shattered something too fragile. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, lightly, reverently. "You gave me a second lifetime," she said, her voice like wind through dry leaves. He nodded, barely breathing. "You were my first home." There was a silence that followed, but wasn't empty. It was full of shared moments, laughter in forgotten kitchens, lullabies hummed under stars, late-night confessions, and the unspeakable bond between a mother and the boy she raised. Maye's breathing slowed. Her lips curved into a final, soft smile. Then, with the sunlight gently touching her cheeks, she left, peacefully, silently, gracefully. As she had lived. Elon remained still. The world outside seemed unaware that it had just lost one of its gentlest lights. But he knew. He felt it in his bones, in the deepest marrow of memory. The nurse entered quietly, stopping when she saw the mirror. Her eyes moistened. Elon didn't look up. He just pressed Maye's hand to his chest and closed his eyes. Time passed again, this time without her. Yet something bloomed. Outside, the garden Maye had once walked through in rare lucid moments now thrived. Lavender, daisies, jasmine. Flowers she had named and loved. Flowers she had forgotten and loved again every time she saw them anew. Elon made it a ritual. Every morning, he returned to the garden with the same thermos of tea and the same book they used to read together, Their Journey. He sat on the stone bench beneath the wisteria, the air thick with memory and scent. He didn't read for her. He read with her. "She may be gone," he once told the nurse, who watched from the porch with quiet respect, "but she remembers me in everything that blooms." He had planted more since her passing. Every new flower was a moment reclaimed, a childhood joke, a bedtime story, a long hug after a bad day. Her favorite rosebush, Elon's bloom, had tripled in size, spreading its fragrance like a whisper across the wind. One morning, as dew kissed the petals and the air hung heavy with the scent of sweet earth, Elon walked through the garden with the book open in his hands. He paused at each bloom, reading aloud, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes falling silent. The pages fluttered in the breeze like wings. He stopped in front of the oldest part of the garden, where Maye had once stood, humming a forgotten tune. He closed the book gently and placed it on the bench. Then he looked to the sky. "If heaven has gardens," he said, his voice breaking just a little, "I hope you're planting lavender." He turned and walked slowly, the garden unfolding around him like a dream remembered. He didn't need to look back. She was everywhere, in every color, in every scent, in every leaf that dared to reach for the sun. And in that garden, love never ended. It only changed form. It bloomed. Now, dear viewer, it's your turn. Leave a comment sharing a memory this story awakened in you. I read every single one with care.